Twilight Zone.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week on this very spot, there commences a very kooky chain of occurrences. The story has to do with a young bank clerk who, for some unexplained and most uncanny reason, finds himself able to read other people's minds, and then finds that the power can get him into a peck of trouble and a bushel of travail. Our show is called A Penny for Your Thoughts, and it'll be here waiting for you next week on The Twilight Zone.
And now, Mr. Serling.
This is room 22, and on the other side of its doors lies an adventure that is as fascinating as it is inexplicable. It's a story that comes to us from Mr. Bennett Cerf, who describes it as an age-old horror tale whose origin is unknown. We've dressed it up in some hospital wrappings and enlisted the performance of Miss Barbara Nichols. Next on The Twilight Zone 22, be prepared to be spooked. It's that kind of story.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week, you'll find each of your names on the passenger manifest of this jet aircraft that travels from London to New York City. You'll sit in these seats and you'll go through an experience unique beyond words and tense beyond anything I believe you've ever seen. You'll be departing next week at about this time in a vehicle we call the Odyssey of Flight 33. But be prepared for a stop midway in the Twilight Zone.
And now, Mr. Serling.
I've only got about 18 seconds to tell you that next week, Mr. Burgess Meredith returns to the Twilight Zone as Mr. Dingle the Strong. He plays the role of an incredible little man who's given the strength of about 500 men and comes out of it as a kind of a 20th century Hercules and Samson all rolled into one. It's designed to send you right from your set into a fast bowl of spinach. It's catching.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Item of consequence, a radio. A carryover from that other era when quiz shows went up to only $64 and entertainment was aimed only at the ears. Mr. Charles Beaumont has given us a most unusual story called Static. We invite you to watch Mr. Dean Jagger fiddle with a few of these knobs, change a few stations, and find a couple of programs that are broadcast only in the Twilight Zone.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week, Mr. Charles Beaumont and Mr. William Idelson deliver a story on your doorstep with the title Long Distance Call. It's uniquely a flesh and fantasy tale involving a small boy, a toy telephone, and the incredible faith of a child. I hope you're around next week at the usual time, which, depending on where you are, varies, and in the usual place, the one that never varies, the uncharted regions of the Twilight Zone.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week, you'll ride up front in this wagon on a trek west. Your itinerary is across the Great Plains over the Rockies to a point in New Mexico. And you'll ride alongside Mr. Cliff Robertson in a strange tale of a handful of American pioneers who made a detour in time and found themselves one afternoon on the fringe of the future. Our story is called 100 Yards Over the Rim, and believe me, it's quite a view. I hope we'll see you then.
And now, Mr. Serling.
We've told some oddball stories on the Twilight Zone, but none of them any more weird than next week's tale. 4 men plan a heist having to do with the theft of $1 million worth of gold bullion. At which point, according to plan, they take a brief vacation from reality and they spend it in a cave in the Twilight Zone. You may not understand it, but I have a feeling that once you turn it on, you won't be turning it off. Next week on the Twilight Zone, the Rip Van Winkle caper. Here's an item we forgot. You see this? It holds a promise for anyone who smokes. It's Oasis. And as its name implies, it promises you the most refreshing, the softest taste of all. Try Oasis. I think you'll like it.
And now, Mr. Serling.
There are all kinds of wagers and all kinds of odds. From the spin of a roulette wheel to a $2 across the board at a racetrack. But next week on the Twilight Zone, with the aid of Mr. Francho Tone, we tell the story of possibly the strangest bet ever to occur in the annals of chance. Our program is called The Silence. I hope we'll see you then. Here's something that doesn't require any imagination. It's Oasis. If you just took this puff, you'd agree. It's the softest taste of all. Before we meet again, try Oasis for the softest taste of all.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week on the Twilight Zone, you'll sit in this courtroom and you'll watch what is apparently the standard everyday turning of the wheels of justice. But because this is the Twilight Zone, don't be fooled by the readily apparent. For when the judge enters, the jury rises, the bailiff calls out the case. All of this is the opening salvo to one of our wildest journeys yet. Our program is called Shadow Play, and it's written by Mr. Charles Beaumont. It comes well recommended.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next week, the very considerable talents of Mr. Shelley Berman are utilized to bring you another in our weekly excursions into the never-never land of the wild, the woolly, and the wondrous. He plays the part of a little man who yearns for the serenity of a world without people. And as it happens, he gets his wish, to walk an uninhabited earth and face the consequences. Our story is called The Mind and the Matter. I hope we see you then. Now, this isn't just a word from the sponsor. It's simply a very good suggestion. It stands for real refreshment. Before we meet again, try Oasis for the softest taste of all.
And now, Mr. Serling.
It's been said that singularly the most difficult feat of all mankind is to find a needle in a haystack. And the Twilight Zone next time we do it one better. We pose a problem of finding a Martian in a snowbank. It all adds up to a kind of extraterrestrial who's who with a couple of laughs and more than a couple of tensions. We recommend this to the space buffs and the jigsaw puzzle addicts. Next time on the Twilight Zone, our story is called Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up?
And now, Mr. Serling.
Mr. Burgess Meredith is no stranger to the Twilight Zone. But his role in next week's story is a unique one even for him. The time will be the future, the place just about anywhere where men have been taken over by a machine state. Our story is called The Obsolete Man. It may chill, it may provoke, but we're rather certain it'll leave a mark. Next week on the Twilight Zone, The Obsolete Man.